Hello everyone, tonight I've got 3 special scary stories for all of you. So before that, make sure to like the video and subscribe to Creepy Sinister, and don't forget to comment below and tell me where you're from and what time you're watching. Now get comfortable and let's begin. Story 1. This happened during my first month working nights at the city library. Everyone was afraid of what was outside, but my fear came from inside my own house. I was 26 at the time and desperate for steady work, so when I saw a posting for a night janitor position at the downtown public library, I didn't think twice. The pay was decent, the hours were overnight, and the listing promised quiet shifts with minimal supervision. I imagined long stretches of silence, podcasts in my ears, and empty hallways that smelled like old paper and cleaning solution. The library itself was an old building, built sometime in the early 1900s, with stone steps, tall windows, and bronze handles worn smooth by decades of hands. During the day it was busy and loud, full of kids, students, and people killing time. At night it became something else entirely. Once the last patrons left and the security guards locked the doors, the place felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. My shift started at 10 p.m., right after closing. The guards would walk me through the main floors, make sure everything was clear, then head out. After that, I was alone until 6 in the morning. My routine was always the same. I started on the main floor, emptying trash cans and wiping tables, then moved up through the reading rooms before finishing in the basement book stacks. The basement was my least favorite part, but it was also where I spent the most time. It was massive, with rows and rows of shelves packed tight with old books that rarely saw daylight. The lights down there were dim and flickered sometimes, and the air was colder than the rest of the building. You could hear everything in that space, even your own breathing, echoing between the shelves. For the first couple of weeks, nothing strange happened. I got used to the quiet, the hum of the lights, and the distant sounds of the building settling. Every now and then, I'd hear a thump or a creak, but I chalked it up to the building being old. The library had been standing longer than anyone alive, so noise was expected. Things started to feel off one night when I was cleaning the basement a little after 1 a.m. I remember checking my phone because I was counting down until my break. I was halfway through an aisle when I heard something that made me stop. It sounded like a whisper, soft and drawn out, just at the edge of hearing. At first I thought it was my imagination. The basement played tricks on you like that. I stood still and listened, holding my breath. The sound stopped, and after a few seconds I laughed it off and went back to work. A few minutes later I heard it again. This time it was clearer. It sounded like someone saying my name, stretched and quiet, like they didn't want to be heard. It came from somewhere deeper in the stacks. I froze, mop handle clenched in my hands. The guards always told me no one was allowed in the basement after closing, and the doors down there stayed locked. I told myself it had to be air moving through the vents or some weird echo. Still, I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded wrong in that space, swallowed up almost immediately. No one answered. The whisper didn't come back either. I finished that aisle faster than usual and headed back upstairs, trying not to think about it. For the rest of the night, I stayed on the main floor and avoided the basement entirely. The next evening I mentioned it to one of the guards as he was leaving. He shrugged and said the building made noises all the time. He told me the basement was especially bad because of the vents and the old wiring. His tone made it clear he thought I was overreacting, so I dropped it. For a few nights after that, everything went back to normal. No whispers, no voices. I started to relax again, convincing myself I'd just been tired. That changed on a Thursday night about 3 weeks into the job. I was in the basement again, cleaning near the back wall where the oldest shelves were kept. It was quiet, even quieter than usual. Then, out of nowhere, the intercom crackled to life. The sound was so sudden I jumped, nearly dropping my keys. The intercom system was old and rarely used at night. The guards only used it during emergencies, and they were gone by then. Static filled the basement, loud and sharp, bouncing off the concrete walls. Then I heard my name. It was clear this time, not a whisper. A flat, calm voice coming through the speakers mounted near the ceiling. It said my full name, slow and deliberate, like it was making sure I was listening. I stood there, staring up at the speaker, my heart pounding. I waited for it to say something else, maybe explain itself. The static returned for a moment, then the intercom went silent. I ran upstairs and checked the security desk, thinking maybe someone had come back into the building. The monitors showed empty rooms and locked doors. The basement feed showed nothing but rows of shelves and dim light. I tried the intercom controls, but they were dead. No power, no response. I didn't finish my shift that night. I told myself I felt sick and left early, my nerves shot. When I got home, I barely slept, replaying the sound of that voice over and over in my head. It hadn't sounded angry or rushed. It sounded patient. The next day I almost quit. The only reason I didn't was because I needed the money, and part of me still wanted a rational explanation. Maybe someone had hacked the system. Maybe a guard had been messing with me. None of those explanations really made sense, but they were better than the alternative. When I came in that night, I promised myself I'd stay upstairs and get out as soon as my shift ended. Everything was fine until a little after 2 a.m. I was in one of the upper reading rooms when the lights flickered. At the same time, I heard the intercom again. This time it didn't just call my name, it asked where I was. The voice sounded closer somehow, like it wasn't echoing through speakers anymore. It repeated the question twice, slow and calm, filling the empty space. I felt cold all over, like someone had opened a window inside my chest. I grabbed my phone and tried calling the guard's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't know what else to do, so I stayed quiet, barely breathing, hoping it would stop. After a few seconds, the intercom clicked off. I finished my tasks in record time and stayed near the front desk until dawn. When the morning staff arrived, I asked if anyone had used the intercom overnight. They looked at me like I was crazy and said no one even knew how to work it anymore. That night was when things escalated. I was in the basement again because avoiding it completely wasn't an option. The moment I stepped off the stairs, I felt like I was being watched. The air felt heavier and the lights flickered more than usual. As I worked, I started hearing whispers again, not just one voice but several, overlapping and soft. I couldn't make out words, just the sound of hushed talking, like a crowd trying to be quiet. Every time I turned around, the shelves were empty. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop: footprints. Fresh ones in the thin layer of dust on the concrete floor, weaving between the aisles. They weren't mine. I followed them without really thinking, my fear giving way to a strange need to understand. The prints led to a locked door at the far end of the basement, one that was supposed to stay sealed. The handle was slowly turning back and forth, as if someone on the other side was testing it. The intercom came on one last time. The voice didn't say my name this time, it just said it was waiting. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing under the streetlights with the library looming behind me. I never went back inside that building again. I quit the next day without giving notice. Months have passed since then, but sometimes, late at night, I think I hear my phone buzz with a notification that isn't there. And every now and then, when I'm alone in a quiet room, I swear I hear my name whispered softly, like something is reminding me it still knows it. Story 2. It was the first night shift at the high school I spent completely alone. I thought the silence would be peaceful, until I realized it wasn't silence at all. I was 27 at the time and had just picked up the overnight janitor job at a public high school in a small Midwestern town. The pay was better than day shifts, and I liked being left alone. After midnight, the place was supposed to be empty except for me. No teachers, no students, no security guards walking the halls. Just long corridors, buzzing lights, and the smell of cleaning chemicals. My routine was always the same. I clocked in a little before 11 p.m., grabbed my cart from the supply closet, and worked my way through the building. Classrooms first, then bathrooms, and finally the locker rooms. The locker rooms were always last because they took the longest and were the creepiest when the rest of the school was dark. That night, the air felt heavier than usual, like a storm was coming, even though the weather was clear. By the time I got to the boys' locker room, it had to be around 1:30 a.m. The hallway lights outside were dimmed, but the locker room lights were fully on, bright and harsh. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls, and the floor was slick from the mop water I'd already spread earlier. The place smelled like bleach and old sweat, a mix I never really got used to. I pushed my cart inside and started wringing out the mop again. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Every drip, every squeak of my shoes felt amplified. I remember thinking how strange it was that I could hear my own breathing so clearly, like the room was listening to me. That's when I heard the other sound. At first it was faint, a soft swishing noise like fabric dragging across a wet floor. I froze, holding the mop handle, and listened. The sound came again, slower this time. It was the exact sound a mop makes when someone is pushing it back and forth. I told myself it was just an echo from earlier, or maybe the pipes settling. Old buildings make noise all the time. Still, I stood there longer than I meant to, staring down the rows of lockers. The room was big, with showers at the far end, partially hidden behind tiled walls. Then I saw movement. At the far end of the locker room, near the showers, someone stepped into view. He was pushing a mop. The bucket rolled behind him, water sloshing quietly inside. For a second, my brain refused to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I knew, without any doubt, that no one else was supposed to be there. My first thought was that maybe the school had hired another overnight janitor and forgot to tell me. That thought didn't last long. The man was wearing the same uniform as me, same dark blue shirt, same faded work pants, even the same scuffed shoes. As he got closer, my stomach dropped. He looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same tired posture from hours of cleaning, even the same haircut I'd given myself in my bathroom mirror a few weeks earlier. It felt like I was looking at a reflection that had stepped out of the glass and into the room. I couldn't move, my hands were numb, and my chest felt tight like I'd forgotten how to breathe properly. The other me didn't react at all. He just kept pushing the mop, eyes down, focused on the floor. His movements were calm and steady, like this was completely normal. I wanted to say something, anything, my name maybe, but no sound came out. My throat was dry and my tongue felt too big for my mouth. The only noise was the slow, wet scrape of his mop and the hum of the lights overhead. When he finally looked up, I almost passed out. His eyes met mine and there was no surprise in them, no confusion, just a blank, empty stare like he'd been expecting to see me standing there. His face didn't change at all. He didn't smile or frown, he just watched me. We stood like that for what felt like minutes, though it was probably only seconds. I remember thinking that if this was a prank, it was the cruelest one I'd ever seen, but there was no one around to laugh, no cameras, no footsteps running away. I took a step back without meaning to. The sole of my shoe squeaked against the wet floor. That sound broke the moment. The other me tilted his head slightly, the way I do when I'm confused or curious. Then he started walking toward me. I dropped my mop. It clattered loudly against the tiles, the sound echoing through the locker room. I backed up faster, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The exit suddenly felt very far away. The other me didn't speed up. He just kept walking, pushing his mop, water rippling across the floor between us. I turned and ran. I don't remember much about the hallway, just the blur of lockers and doors as I sprinted toward the main corridor. My shoes slipped and I almost fell more than once. I didn't look back. I was terrified that if I did, I'd see him right behind me, matching my every move. I didn't stop until I reached the front office area where the lights were brighter. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The building was silent again. No footsteps, no mop sounds, nothing. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Lack of sleep, stress, the creepy environment, all of it could mess with your head. I laughed nervously to myself, even though it didn't feel funny. I told myself to finish the shift and go home. I waited until nearly 3 a.m. before forcing myself to go back. I grabbed a new mop from the supply closet and slowly made my way toward the locker room. Every step felt heavy. I kept expecting to see him standing in the hallway, blocking my path. The locker room lights were still on when I got there. The floor was cleaner than I'd left it, perfectly clean, no streaks, no footprints. My dropped mop was gone. I stood in the doorway scanning the room. Nothing moved. The showers were empty. The lockers were still. The air smelled fresh, like someone had just finished cleaning. I didn't go inside. I radioed the district office, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what happened. They told me there was no one else scheduled that night. No security, no second janitor. They suggested I call the local police if I felt unsafe. The police arrived a little after 4 a.m. 2 officers walked the building with me, checking every room. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no extra equipment, no evidence that anyone else had been there. One of them gave me a look that said he thought I was just tired and seeing things. I finished my shift sitting in the break room, staring at the clock until sunrise. I didn't clean anything else. I didn't move unless I had to. When my shift ended, I left without looking back. I told myself I wouldn't return, but I needed the money, and part of me wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. So 2 nights later, I went back. I stayed near other areas of the school and avoided the locker rooms completely. Nothing happened. Over the next few weeks, I tried to forget about it. I worked faster. I kept my headphones in. I avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces when I could. The memory faded, but it never fully left. Then one morning, my supervisor called me into his office. He asked if I'd been coming in early lately. I told him no. He looked confused and said someone had been signing into the building around 12:30 a.m. on nights I wasn't scheduled yet, using my badge. I quit that day. I turned in my uniform, my keys, and my badge. As I walked out, I passed the hallway that led to the locker rooms. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement through the small window in the door, a familiar figure pushing a mop. I didn't stop to check. I still wake up some nights convinced I can hear that soft swishing sound, like a mop sliding across a wet floor. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a dark window, it feels like it's watching me just a second too long, as if it's waiting for me to look away first.
Story 3.
Back in 2018, I worked the night shift at a gas station. I used to think the scariest thing I'd see was a drunk customer. I was wrong. I didn't stay at that job very long. After a few months of dealing with weird people and worse hours, I took a maintenance job at the regional airport outside my city. It paid better and the night shift felt calmer. After the last flight left, the terminal turned quiet in a way that felt almost peaceful. Long hallways, dim lights, and the low hum of air systems became my entire world. Most nights followed the same routine. I clocked in just before 10 p.m., checked the assignment board, and grabbed whatever equipment was listed under my name. Trash runs, bathroom checks, and floor cleaning filled the hours until sunrise. The passenger areas were empty, but the maintenance corridors behind the scenes never really felt asleep. They were narrow, windowless, and always a little colder than the rest of the terminal. That was where the floor buffer came in. It was an old machine, beige and scratched up, with chipped paint and a handle that rattled when you pushed it. Everyone avoided it because it left streaks and smelled like burnt rubber when it ran too long. One night, my supervisor pointed at my name on the board and said that the buffer was mine until further notice. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. The first night I used it, nothing seemed wrong. I ran it through the employee corridors after the last cleaning crew left, moving slow so I didn't miss any spots. The buffer made a deep, steady whirring sound that echoed down the hallways. When I finished one stretch and turned it off, I noticed faint smudges on the floor behind me. At first, I thought they were just dirty marks from my gloves. When I looked closer, I realized they were handprints, small ones. They were pressed flat against the floor, fingers spread, like someone had leaned down and touched the ground. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of it, then wiped them away with my rag. I told myself some kid must have been messing around earlier in the day. The next night, the handprints came back. I had just finished another corridor, and when I shut the buffer off, there they were again. Same size, same shape. They appeared only where I had already cleaned, never ahead of me. I checked my own gloves and hands, then pressed my palm to the floor to compare. Mine were way bigger. I reported it to my supervisor during our overlap at shift change. He looked tired and distracted and said it was probably leftover residue reacting to the cleaner. He told me to stop overthinking it and finish my assignments. I wanted to believe him, so I nodded and went back to work. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Over the next week, the handprints became clearer. They weren't smudges anymore. You could see the lines of the fingers and the curve of the palm. Sometimes there were 2 prints, sometimes 4, always trailing behind the buffer like they were following it. I started checking over my shoulder while I worked, half expecting to see someone crouched on the floor behind me. The corridors made that fear worse. The lights were spaced far apart, leaving long shadows between them. Doors led to storage rooms and utility closets, most of them locked, some of them not. The farther I went from the main terminal, the quieter it got. Even the sound of the buffer seemed swallowed up by the walls. One night around 1:30 a.m., I noticed something new. The handprints weren't directly behind me anymore. They were slightly off to the side, like whoever was making them had shifted position. I stopped the buffer and stood still, listening. The only sound was my own breathing and the distant hum of the building. I crouched down and stared at the prints. They looked fresh, like they had just been pressed into the damp cleaner. I wiped them away again, slower this time, and stood up. When I turned back around, there was another print near the wall, a little farther away. I hadn't moved the buffer. I backed up, heart pounding, and turned the machine back on. I told myself I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. I finished the corridor faster than usual and pushed the buffer into the next area. Every few minutes, I glanced down, dreading what I might see. By the middle of the shift, I realized the prints were moving, not all at once and not in front of my eyes, but between moments. I would wipe them away, take a few steps, and when I looked back, new ones had appeared in a different spot, always closer, always trailing me, never leading. I stopped reporting it after that. I didn't want to sound crazy, and I could already imagine the looks I'd get. Instead, I started timing my checks, forcing myself to look back every few seconds. The fear sat heavy in my chest, like I was being watched by something just out of sight. The buffer felt heavier in my hands, harder to control. One night, the buffer shut off on its own. I hadn't touched the switch. The corridor went silent so suddenly it made my ears ring. I stood frozen, staring down at the floor. The handprints were there again, more of them than before, clustered together like someone had been crawling. I took a step back and one of the prints smeared slightly. That's when I realized it wasn't just a mark anymore. It looked wet, fresh. I felt my stomach drop, and I turned and ran toward the nearest open area without looking back. I spent the rest of that shift doing anything I could to avoid the buffer. I cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash, and stayed in well-lit areas. When my supervisor asked why my assigned corridors weren't finished, I lied and said the machine overheated. He told me to use it again the next night. The following shift was worse. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I would get through it quickly. As soon as I turned the buffer on, the smell of burnt rubber filled the air. The lights flickered once, then steadied. I pushed forward, forcing myself not to look down. I didn't make it far. The buffer slowed like it was dragging over something heavy. I looked down and my breath caught. Handprints were appearing right beside the machine now, not behind it. One by one, they pressed into the floor, fingers spreading slowly, like something was climbing up from beneath. I stumbled back and nearly fell. The buffer tipped forward, still running, and the handprint stopped. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then one last print appeared, closer to my feet than any before. I didn't wait to see more. I left the buffer where it was and walked straight to security. I told them something was wrong with the equipment and that I wasn't going back into that corridor. They exchanged looks but didn't argue. One of them said maintenance would handle it in the morning. I didn't sleep after that shift. The image of those prints stayed burned into my mind. When I went back the next night, the buffer was gone. My supervisor said it had been taken out of service. He didn't say why, and I didn't ask. A week later, I overheard two older workers talking in the break room. One of them mentioned the buffer, joking that it always picked up more than dirt. When he noticed me listening, he stopped talking. The other one changed the subject. I still work at the airport. I've used a lot of machines since then, but never that one. Sometimes, when I'm cleaning late at night, I'll catch sight of faint marks on the floor behind me. They're usually gone when I look again, but I always make sure they're not getting closer.